Hey class, welcome to 15.2 as we begin to march into battle in the Civil War. Before we begin looking at the battles, I want to mention a few new modern aspects of the Civil War. Now, we won't think of these things as being very modern in today's standards, but some of the things that were more modern at this day and age was the railroad being used to move goods, to move supplies. The telegraph has just been invented. It's going to be used a lot by President Lincoln as he instructs his generals as to what to do next. Also, we saw a lot of mines, trench warfare, wire barricades, other methods used. We had new and developed cannons and rifles that could shoot longer distances and were more accurate. A lot of cavalry was being used at this time, mounted troops. They'd be used to get reconnaissance, kind of spy, find out information, find out troop movement. That was an effective new use during the Civil War. Also, we had ironclad ships. These ironclad ships covered in iron worked just a lot better in the seas than the old wooden ship was. And then one kind of cool thing was the hot air balloon also was used. They didn't drop off bombs from it or anything, but it was helpful to identify some troop movement and kind of spy and see what was going on from a kind of a bird's eye view. And the very first battle is going to kick off at the Battle of Bull Run. We notice here Bull Run right in here, July 21st, 1861. Notice right here is the star. This is also right when you're pretty close to Richmond. And that was the goal of the Union here, was to attack Richmond. And the Union was led by General Irvin McDowell, and the Confederates were led by General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The Union, of course, desiring to reach Richmond and defeat the capital there of the South. But this battle was won by the Confederacy, but really neither army was able to celebrate much. It was both armies showed they were kind of disheveled at this point, not really ready. The South was victorious, and the South left this early battle pretty confident. I'm a little bit cocky, even thinking that this whole war is going to go pretty easy for them. And pretty crazy at this point, folks, that people actually came out to watch the war, like you're watching a sporting event. And they would sit on their blankets and have a picnic while watching people fight and kill each other. That mood, of course, changed quickly when people actually started to die. But what was really good about this battle for the Union was, while the South went away feeling pretty confident and cocky, the North saw, boy, we have some weaknesses, and they began to prepare themselves better. They began to do more training and get better. So even though the South wins, long term is going to be good for the North here as they better themselves and prepare for the next battle. The second battle early on was the 7 Days Battle. Notice how close it is to Richmond. Look, we're just right there. We're so close. And at this point, the North, the Union, is being led by George C. McClellan here. And Lincoln is telling McClellan, you are so close. You are so close to the capital. Push on. Press on. But McClellan was very timid, and he says, no, I'm not quite ready yet. I need a few more troops to come. And McClellan is overly cautious. If he had been a little more aggressive, he probably could have pushed on and defeated the capital. And in the meantime, the South's being led initially by a man named Joseph E. Johnston. Well, he's not pictured here. He's going to get wounded, gets replaced by the great General Robert E. Lee of the South. And he is going to come with his men, and he is able to push McClellan back, push him all the way back to where he had started from 7 days earlier. McClellan was just 9 miles from Richmond, so close to reaching the goal. But because of his hesitation, he gets stopped, and it's seen as it is another victory for the Confederates early on in this war. And then the fighting returned back to Bull Run. Notice again, August 19 to 30, about a year later, a second battle of Bull Run, as they tried to reach Richmond, right? One of the goals of the Union was to capture Richmond. At this point, we had John Pope, a Union general, who's going to join McClellan. They're to join forces, but again, they're met by Stonewall Jackson. And Stonewall Jackson is probably the second best military mind in the entire war behind Robert E. Lee. Notice that the South had all the great military minds, and this does not go well for the North. It goes so badly. John Pope gets so humiliated by this battle that he actually gets banished. That's right. He gets banished all the way to Minnesota to fight the Indians. So he's gone. They got rid of him, and they're victorious. And Jackson reflected on the day, saying, "But nothing but the blessing and protection of Providence," kind of God's providence and will for them, was to win this. And this battle, 1 year into the war, really marks the high point for the Confederacy. They've been very, very successful during this first year, and confidence is high, and they are thinking, we've got this war in the bag, and we're going to be successful long term. And then one more point I want to make here is we've talked already about the blockade, and the Union has created this blockade all around the coastline. Notice how large the coastline is of the Confederates. It's huge. Well, of course, they can't make their own industrial items and different factory items, so they're forced to buy all of them from Europe. And so Lincoln says, let's block them in to prevent goods from reaching them. It's a great idea. Well, one of the goals the South had was to break the blockade. And so they have these ships called blockade runners. Blockade runners. And runners actually could dart into shallow inlets for cover, while the Union ships needed deeper water. The runners were painted gray to blend in with the sea and the sky. They were steam powered, and because they weren't as big as the big battleships or merchant ships, they could go a lot faster. Well, about half of the blockade runners were successful. The other half would get captured by the North, and those resources were then used by the North. But it did help, even though they lost a lot of them, it helped them out. Overall, the blockade really favors the North. But the South was mildly successful in breaking the blockade. So early on in this war, I want you to note, the Confederacy is off to a very strong start. They're feeling very confident. The tide is turning their way. But that overconfidence has bred some cockiness, while the North is better preparing themselves, training themselves, getting themselves ready for this long battle. Most thought this war would last a few months. We're a year in, year and a half in almost, and we're not even close to the end.